Welcome back to this video series of C++ programming. This is the lecture 19 of this video series. Today we are going to discuss about the default function arguments in C++. Default function arguments provides an alternative to a function overloading or a constructor overloading. C++ allows a function to assign a parameter a default value when no argument corresponding to that parameter is specified in a call to that function. Let's take this example. Here, this is one function, and inside this, we are passing one where we have placed one argument, and that is of integer type. And in this, we are assigning the value of this pass value to the temporary variable p. And this is a declaration. Now, this function, in the context of default function arguments, the prototype of the function can be declared in this manner. And inside this the arguments, you can specify the default value for this parameter. Now, how this default value works? Now, this function can be called the two different ways. One is by passing a value to this function. When you pass, this 10 is collected in this a variable and now it is assigned to b. But there is another way you can call this function, and that is without passing any value. And when you do this, the default function argument is used in this case. That means this is the default value. So a default has a value 0. So now when you call this function, the b is assigned with the value of a 0, which is a default value. And this is the default function arguments. Now this is another way to provide the function overloading. You are not creating the two separate functions, but with the help of a single function, here should be a function. With the help of a single function and with the help of this default function arguments, you are providing an alternative to the function overloading. Let's talk some of the important point of default function arguments. When you are creating a function that have default arguments, it is important to remember that the default values must be specified only once, and this must be first time the function is declared within the file. In this case, the default arguments must be specified only once. So this a equal to 0 assignment should happen at here or either here. I mean, if this is now the prototype declaration, and this is a normal function which is not a member function. So in that case, this default function argument assignment must happen here. If this is a member function and it is defined within a class itself, then this default function argument must happen here. But if it is a class member function and it is defined outside the class with the membership label of that class, then that default function argument initialization must be happened within the prototype that is present within the class. So we'll see this point with the help of an example. We'll understand more it with an example. The second point, all parameters that take default values must appear to the right of those that do not. So the default arguments must be specified only onto the right side. And if there are more than one parameters, so the parameters which doesn't take default arguments must be specified on the left side, and the one which takes default values must be specified on the right side. Now let's understand these 2 points with the help of an example. We'll see two examples. One is default argument function, and second is a default argument constructor. First, we'll create one function here and call this as a display, and we'll pass one parameter to this function. And inside this main function, we'll call this display function. And here, let's print the value of this a variable. Here we'll pass this value. So we are displaying the value which are passing by this function. Now in this enormous function, this 40 will be passed in A and it will be displayed on the console window. But if you want to use the default function arguments, then you can specify this value here, which is the default value, say that the A has a 0. and then you can call the function with the same name, but this time without any value or without any arguments. Now let's compile the program. Here, let's put this new line character. And now let's compile the program and let's run it to see what does it outputs. So it is outputting the value as a 40 and a 0. The 40 is the one which we passed and 0 is the default value or the default argument. This is how the default argument works. You can specify this default arguments when you are creating function prototype, and then at this line it is not required to specify this default function argument again. And in the second point we discussed, if this function is expecting more than the one argument, let's say we're passing another variable here and print the values of both these variables, and here also we need to specify this uh, the another variable. Now in this case, as we talked before, the default function arguments must be on the right side of those which doesn't take the default function arguments. So this a is equal to 0 should be written after this integer b variable. If you try to compile the program, or even if you see here, it is saying default argument not at end of parameter list. So you have to specify this default argument list. So if you have more than one default argument list, all must be uh, listed after this non-default of arguments. And here in this display function, now we are passing the two arguments here. One is the default and one is the actual argument. So here at least we should pass the one argument, which is the actual argument, and then the here if I specify the 40 and 50, then the a will be assigned the value 40 and b will be assigned with 50. In the scenario, this a will be assigned with value 40 and b will be assigned with the value 50. But in this case, a is the actual argument, so 40 will be assigned to this a and b will hold the value as a 0. Okay, now let's run the program and let's see what does it outputs. And as you can see, it is outputting on the first line as 40 and 50 and second line as 40 and a 0. So this is what we are expecting from this program. I hope now you have understood this default function arguments, and as we discussed, it provides an alternative for the function overloading. So rather than creating the two different functions and overloading them, we can use the default function arguments and then call these two different functions. And let's take the second example, that is a default argument constructor. Now, similar to a function, we can provide the default arguments to a constructor as well. So here we'll create one class called C1, and we'll create some public members here. And inside this, we'll create one constructor. So it's a C1. And inside this main function, we'll create one object of this class. Now in this case, when you're creating this object, this constructor function will be called. If you are initializing any parameters to this object, suppose you're initializing the value as 20 to this object, then the program expect another constructor function because there is no matching argument list available for this. But in this case, if we provide some default arguments, say a as a 0, now there is no need to create the constructor function. Now this default argument function is acting as a parameterized constructor. And if I create another object which does not take any or does not initialize any values, then in that case also the program works fine. You don't have to create two different constructor function. In the first function, if you print the value of this a variable, with this first function, this 20 will be assigned to this variable a, which will be outputting here. And in this second case, in this object 2, the default value of a will be 0, and it will print value as 0. If you compile this program, you must see the same result. First value as 20 and second value as 0. So this is how the default arguments are worked with the constructor. So this again provides an alternative for the constructor overloading. Instead of creating the two different or constructor function, you can use the default arguments. Alright, so we talked about the default function arguments and the default arguments to the constructor. I hope you have now understood the concept of default function arguments. So thanks for watching this video and stay tuned for the upcoming videos.